Welcome to HubSpot's Unconventional Business podcast. I'm your host, James Gilbert. The best companies are the ones that make it incredibly easy and delightful to do business with. It's seamless, frictionless, intuitive. It's not just a better experience, they're actually disrupting our very notion of what consumers should be able to expect from companies. You see, Aussies and Kiwis are a hard bunch to please. We have some of the highest expectations in the world, and luckily for us, our homegrown businesses know this. This season on HubSpot's Unconventional Business, you'll be meeting some of our best homegrown brands as they share how they're growing and winning by disrupting the customer experience. Let's meet today's guest. Welcome back to Unconventional Business. I'm your host, James Gilbert. With us today, we have a really interesting Australian company that's disrupting the way you're receiving parcels, which at this time due to COVID, you're probably receiving a lot of. I have Eva Ross, the Chief Marketing Officer and Chief Customer Officer from Sendle. Hey, Eva, thanks for joining us.
Thanks so much for having me.
So for people that don't know about Sendle, how would you describe it to them?
So Sendle is a 100% carbon neutral parcel delivery company that's specifically designed for small businesses. And our mission, I suppose is important to include, is shipping that's good for the world. And when we think about good in terms of carbon neutral, and we think about being good for small business and for competition.
One of the things as I was learning about Sendle, I found it hard to understand how it would come to exist. You know, when I think about shipping and the infrastructure that's required to actually pull that off, you think it can only be something like an Australia Post. Like, where did you see, or where did Sendle see the opportunity that it was like, no, this is actually broken and here's how we can fix it for customers?
I think that's a great point, James, because for a lot of people, parcel delivery is completely invisible, right? You order something online, it arrives. You don't think too much about all of the things and all of the journey that your parcel goes on in between. And you certainly don't if everything goes right. But the origin story is quite interesting. So our founder, James Chin Moody, was on sabbatical with his wife in France and was thinking about some of the ways that he might want to do something a little bit different while he was the primary carer. And at the time, they had a lot of baby clothes, a lot of toys that they were getting rid of as the boys were getting older. And they thought about how they could share those with people who maybe weren't in their direct neighborhood, but were maybe a little bit further away. And so they built a platform called ToShare, within which you could really list any item at all. And the difference between, say, a traditional eBay, where you're paying for the good, was that you were actually paying for the shipping and the good was free. So they'd really sort of broken that model. And after a while, they noticed that a lot of the goods that were appearing on the platform were dedicated for a specific person. So these headphones are for James. And so then James would come and take them off the market and have them shipping. And they realized that they were sort of being hacked for the great shipping service. And as more and more customers came across from e-commerce platforms, they realized what they'd actually designed was a shipping service for e-commerce.
How was their shipping service different? Was it just using existing shipping services, or he figured out his own way of doing that, or how did that work? Why was it better?
Well, it's interesting when you think about giving away something for free. The competition is really the garbage bin. And so you've got to make it super easy and you've got to make it super affordable. So in terms of ease, having the item picked up from you and picked up from your door was something that was going to be really competitive. And the other one was just simplicity. I think we've all had the experience of going to the post office and being a little bit shocked once we get to the front counter as to what the real price is. The idea was to create kind of complete simplicity and kind of a known entity in terms of what the price was going to be. And when they started looking at Australia Post, they noticed, hey, if you wanted to send this 10 kilo package to Perth, it could cost you up to $100. And that just didn't seem right. And that sort of led to a real exercise of identifying all of the pain points that existed in traditional shipping and trying to break all of those down. So some of the things were, if you're running a small business, you don't have time to spend your lunchtime lining up at the post office. If you're listing, if you want to list, say, free shipping, you want to be very sure about what those rates are. And so therefore creating flat rate shipping where you can sort of set those expectations really early on was super important. And I think as we went through the process, we saw, Australia posted something like nearly 6,000 different prices for sending a single item to a single destination. And for someone running a small business, that's a complicated pricing table to be looking through. So they really wanted to simplify that. And I think at this point, we have 3 different price plans and 6 different pricing sizes. So really 18 in total in comparison.
That's pretty fascinating. I definitely, as a small business owner, would prefer going through 3 prices instead of 6,000. I think it taps into actually a pretty interesting dynamic where if you are a small business owner, you really are focused on what the business is, not as much the processes around it. And I think companies that overcomplicate the need for your processes to adapt to their pricing model really struggle to get what it is that these people are trying to do. So that makes a lot of sense. Why, if you have such an opportunity to make the service better in terms of delivery, in terms of simplicity of pricing, what's the importance of the BCorp element? Why the carbon neutral? Why being certified as a BCorp? Why is that important to Sendle and possibly your customers?
Yeah, I mean, I think coming from these origins of TwoShare, where we were really talking about a circular economy solution, taking that concept and those principles through into Sendle was just so important. And I think we really think about, to be honest with you, our objective is to have every parcel be sent carbon neutrally, to really look at the logistics industry and say, hey, at the moment, this contributes something like 10% of emissions globally, and what can we do about that? And really sort of thinking about that change in the long term. I think there was an investor very early on who was trying to encourage Sendle not to become a B Corp because they thought it might become a distraction. And they were offering $1 million investment, and we turned it down. And I think, to me, that was very symbolic of how important to us, not only to look at kind of our impact now, but what that will be in the future. And so I think we've been looking at really trying to optimize all of our operations for sustainability and also all of the other parts of being a B Corp. So considering stakeholders such as your partners, customers and their customers, as well as the environment, and of course, as well as your investors. And I think if you start to set your goals and align what you're doing internally as a company with those objectives, you get a very different result.
How does it resonate with your customers? Is it a reason that they come to Sendle, or is it more a nice to have in their mind, or a little bit of both? It depends on the customer.
I think we're really seeing a change and a shift in that, actually, particularly since the global pandemic and us seeing the sort of impacts that humans do have on the environment and the things going on around us. But I suppose for us, there are customers for whom they know their customers care. And so that it's simply a pass-on benefit. And there were others for whom they've made really careful, ethical and organic choices about their supply chain, about the materials that they're using, about the packaging that they're using. And then to be faced with this shipping that may have such an impact, for them it's so wonderful to be able to find a solution that is 100% carbon neutral. And also we've been selling packaging that's compostable and home compostable, so you can literally put it in your own worm garden. And to have solutions like that are available and affordable has been great for that sector of small businesses.
It's often a tricky balance to be able to get it to be not only like something that you're willing to do, but to be able to get the price point to a place where it's easy enough for customers to do that. Like I find when we chat to a lot of businesses trying to achieve similar goals, often that price point is where it's tricky. That if you want to be a B Corp, if you want to make it compostable, if you want to have like extra services on top of this, but at a lower price, it's a pretty delicate balance to be able to achieve that. Is that something that, as you've grown in scale, has become more and more achievable, or you've found ways to actually have that work from the start?
Yeah, it's true. I think we've always tried to be cheaper and greener. I think in our experience, people associate green or organic with more expensive. And so often it is that we're leading with price point and then surprising and delighting customers with the fact that we're also carbon neutral. But I think in the long term, if you make these investments and, for example, you're considering energy savings or you're considering using solar, over time, a lot of those costs will actually come down. You make an early investment, say in solar, and then those rewards pay themselves back and pay it forward, within something like 10 years. So I think it's really worth considering the long-term impacts of making those decisions.
Yeah, definitely. And I really like your point around, where you're an ambitious and fast-growing company, getting this stuff right now is only going to have more and more impact in the right way, versus not doing it now is going to mean it's going to be a harder and harder decision to make in the future. So I think like getting that foundation right while you're still growing but still early in your growth journey is going to really help your impact when you get to the scale that you want, be the impact that you want, which is super important.
100%. Yeah, having it kind of on the agenda early means you see the rewards later on. I mean, we only saw that become the truth for us last year. We did a campaign, which was a lot of fun, where we used the typical iconography that you see of Australiana and Australian animals, and did a campaign around putting on a sticker showing that animal, in some cases wearing a gas mask, to kind of show the carbon neutral aspects of Sendle, and to put those on a parcel in a way to challenge Australia Post to join us in our efforts to become carbon neutral. And they did. I mean, who'd have thought? It was just tremendous to see Australia Post follow suit and join us, certainly with some of the shipments that they do, to have them also be carbon neutral. And just to see the market and the industry change in that direction, for us is just a huge win, and a huge win for the environment, of course.
Absolutely. I think you must have an interesting relationship with Australia Post, where I feel like 10 years ago, if you wanted to send a parcel, there was either very expensive courier services or Australia Post, and there was nothing else really. And you've kind of emerged as this alternative to Australia Post for a lot of people. Like, how was that relationship? It sounds like you're pushing them in the right direction in terms of following suit with a lot of these like BCorp type initiatives. But I'm sure it hasn't always been a complimentary response that you're seeing from them. Has it sometimes been quite contentious, or what's that looked like over time?
I mean, ultimately, competition is very healthy, right? And I think for us, it's just about the fact that these small businesses are heavily underserved. As you say, if they're only doing a couple of shipments, they either have the option of going down to the post office and lining up and paying parcel post rates, or really trying to meet courier requirements of having a minimum volume to be able to ship. And there's not a lot in between. So I think we just saw a real gap in that market where those guys were being underserved and really unable to compete with the big guys, and unable to compete on a level playing field with some of the big folks out there. And I think we just saw that as an opportunity to help, and also to really kind of foster what is the Australian backbone of small businesses. And for me, it's a lot about allowing people to live out those dreams, right? People have gone from having a dress studio in their garage, and these days they've gone online, they're shipping all over the country and sometimes all over the world. And so to be able to facilitate that, particularly as a CCO is so wonderful. Yeah,
it feels like we're in a very interesting time. I was listening to the COO of Shopify talk about during COVID how he's actually seen a lot of businesses really flourish, because e-commerce has obviously become, I think it's 10 years of growth in the last few months. And there's a lot of people who, like you say, are just running a small business, but they're running it online. And so they can actually ship anywhere, and they can have a bigger reach than they previously thought was possible through access to platforms like Shopify that enable them to sell online pretty easily, and then platforms like yourself that enable them to actually send the goods pretty easily. Have you seen that? You must have pretty fascinating insights. I know you've done some research into small business during this time, but it feels like some would actually be thriving.
Oh, completely. I think there was a day in March when 50% of our senders were new senders. So i.e. they were all very new to e-commerce. And I thought that was an insane trend. You saw all of these people suddenly starting a side hustle. Maybe something had changed in their own job situation, or they were looking for a new stream of income, and they were suddenly sending online. So that in itself was fascinating. And yeah, I think as Shopify have been talking about quite a lot, we've advanced 10 years in, a number of weeks, so sort of decades in weeks. And I think that's so interesting in terms of the opportunities that creates. So we heard from a lot of customers who, there was a guy who was selling gin, who was mostly doing that locally in Sydney. And then he started producing hand sanitizer, and suddenly he had this huge Australian audience and was immediately able to deliver to all of them across the country, sort of overnight. And it's just fascinating seeing all of those trends. I think the Melbourne lockdown was certainly very interesting for us as well. I think the first Monday we were up 2.65x on the number of shipments that were going into Melbourne and into Victoria. A lot of that, I'm sure, was concerned folks sending care packages and looking after family members, but also just that really big change for Australia to suddenly go online and start shipping everything. So it will be interesting to see what we see kind of longer term, and particularly as we come into peak for Christmas. I wonder if that's a behaviour that's really shifted for the long term, or if it's something that sort of the pandemic and this lockdown has driven increased demand for.
Yeah, I'm very curious to watch that, whether it's like it's going to cause a permanent behavior change, or when we can hopefully go back to life as it was, people will go back to life as it was in all senses. I'm sure it'll probably be somewhere in the middle. I know myself, I actually weirdly had not done a lot of e-commerce purchases, and then was forced to in some various lockdown scenarios, and the convenience is actually ridiculous sometimes, just how good it is and how much easier it makes life. And I can imagine people where they are in a pinch where they need the convenience, and now they've experienced just how good it is. It feels like you'd be mad to turn back in those scenarios.
Yeah, completely. It's like any threshold you can't get past, right? Suddenly we're all forced to shop online, and then we realize how easy it is. And equally, people are forced to test out that hobby as a real business and see what it becomes. And I think, I just love the creativity of all of that, and how we kind of see these real risk takers and explorers really trying things out. I think it's been fascinating. But you asked a little bit before around kind of attitude and hopes. We interviewed a lot of our customers kind of midway through the year to see how they were feeling about the second half of 2020. And 85% of our customers said that they were optimistic about the future. So I think a lot of people are on the belief that this is something we'll see continue. And I only hope so.
I'm sure that has created a lot of stress internal. Like, one of the double-edged swords about growth as a business is it's great to get such extreme growth, but that often puts a lot of pressure on the business being able to deliver on its promise to customers. How has that been for Sendle? When you're getting to nearly 3x the volume of orders, that's probably going to put a lot of stress on your systems and processes and people. Like, can you talk through what that's been like and how, as a company, you've managed that?
Oh, it certainly did early on. I think also we didn't know how long it was going to last, right? So is it sort of temporary staff, or is it something that you're going to have to hire for the long term for? I think from a support standpoint, we've certainly ramped up the size of our team in Manila, and also the access to tools. And we've also probably progressed some of the ideas around automation and self-serving tools for the customer a little bit faster than we'd originally imagined, which has really been good for the customer, because they're able to own their own destiny when it comes to parcel tracking and changes and those sorts of things. I think because Sendle works using a partner network, actually being able to increase volume and increase the volumes that were going through those different networks was probably easier for us than it has been for other folks in the industry, because it simply meant that we had to sort of turn on those additional carriers and access their networks and their delivery vehicles and their depots through the process. So probably on that side, things have been good. But things have been difficult on the international front, flight delays, the number of flights that are available, and kind of, the costs of doing that, I think have been tough. But I think they've been tough for everybody. But I think it's also brought about a really interesting change where people know they can't rely on international deliveries quite so much. And so they're looking for local goods and Australian goods to replace them. And I think that in doing that, they're finding brands that they love and finding new brands that they love. And that's been a really good trend to see.
I've noticed that as well. You talk to a lot of people, and I think crises like this are interesting in how they change people's perspectives. And one of the things has been, trying to support those around you. And I've spoken to a lot of people that are like preferring to buy from local businesses because they know they might be hurting, or from Australian businesses to support the Australian economy. And even if it's more expensive, they're happy to do that as their way of voting for support, I guess. It's interesting. You're hearing it a lot, and I think it's both. It's by virtue of, well, I don't have a choice, like we're not going to get international shipments, but then there is that more altruistic perspective of, no, I'm choosing to vote with my wallet that I'm going to be supporting local small business, local Australian businesses. It'll be fascinating to see if that stays. I feel like it will. What's your view? Do you think it will, or it's just a temporary thing?
I think it absolutely will. Overwhelmingly, the feedback from our customers was that they are sourcing things locally more so because of concerns around supply chain, and therefore with opening those things up, they're able to then produce different ranging. And I think that then creates consumer choice for a lot of customers. I think, the fact that we had the first P2 mask developed in Australia that was being shipped across Australia from here, suddenly meets a really big demand in no time at all, and with no concerns around risks on delays and that sort of thing. I hope that people are encouraged by the amounts of variety they can find here at home. And as we said, we're seeing a real interest in not only local businesses, but businesses across Australia, things that are Australian made. And I think we'll see growth in both of those categories. You
also launched into the US in the last 6 to 9 months. And I feel like that in and of itself would have been probably Herculean task inside Sendle. That combined with COVID must have been pretty tricky to navigate. What's the experience been like with your push into the United States?
Oh, it's been fascinating. And as you say, I don't think we've had a normal month. So we launched in November, which of course is Black Friday. Black Friday now has Small Business Saturday following it, and of course Cyber Monday. So it's become this almost 2-week period at this point over in the States. So we launched in the November with that. Then we sort of saw peak period in Christmas. Then a little bit of a downturn in January, but then straight into COVID and kind of the re-acceleration of the business through that. So as I'm trying to model things, we don't really know what a normal month looks like. So it's been pretty fascinating. But look, the go-to-market strategy for America was super interesting. We did some work initially to have a look at all of the states that had mandatory composting, almost as a proxy for which markets are going to be interested in the fact that we're 100% carbon neutral, and of course, who's going to be interested in the fact that we've got home compostable packaging. I spoke to a lot of customers about, the number of cardboard boxes that are filling up back alleys, and how more and more packaging decisions are becoming part of the purchase process earlier on than they ever used to be. So we had a look sort of in those cities at who the creators and makers were, had a look at really digging into the creative set and who was going to be interested in this sort of area. We see a huge propensity for makers and designers and micro entrepreneurs on Sendle in Australia, and we thought we'd see the same pattern over in the States. And one of our first hires was Jen McGoffner, who herself used to run a small business, and not only did she know kind of operationally what that meant, but she also was heavily involved in a lot of small business communities and could get feedback really quickly. So for us, it was key to kind of find who are those first 100 customers, let's talk to them a lot and understand what the true sort of bespoke solution for their needs will be in an aim to get to product market fit. And that whole process was really interesting. HubSpot, of course, was very useful to us. We localized the site within a matter of weeks and brought on a great copywriter who not only localized the content, but used all of the local vernacular. I think it's so important to have boots on the ground for that sort of thing, and really told the Sendle story in a way that was easily understood by the US audience. We learned that you can't use the word post, you need to use the word mail. we learned that a satchel is called a mailer, and various other versions of how to use the language. And then from there we've really gone deep on that idea of what is product market fit, how do you measure it? I think you may have heard of sort of the studies where you ask people how disappointed they would be if they could no longer use Sendle. And sort of various other measures to understand organic growth and impact. So it's been a wild ride, as you said, doing both of that while going through COVID. It's been interesting, but the team have been just thriving, really. And I think we get a lot of energy from the small businesses that are growing in that process.
Have there been any big surprises in terms of how businesses work with Sendle in the United States versus in Australia, or is it much the same? What's that experience been like?
I think the biggest surprise has been the sophistication of that customer. You get the best feedback from your customers. There's a guy who runs a blog called the Seller Center, and he, within weeks of us launching, had written a huge review on all of the things that he loved about Sendle and all of the feedback. And then he's sort of become our compass on what we're doing well and what we're doing not so well. So we followed up with him and keep taking on feedback. He's sort of become part of our focus group since then. So I think if anything, it's just the sophistication of folks, how much they know about whatever else is going on in the market and who's new, and also great feedback. I think the United States has had a huge customer service industry for a very long time, and so you get very quick and high quality feedback really, really early on, and making sure you're listening to that and taking it on board has been super important for us to grow.
Yeah, I could imagine actually that would be a cultural difference that would be interesting, where you'd be getting more feedback that would actually help you refine your approach. Whereas in Australia, maybe we wouldn't give as much feedback. We'd be like, oh, whatever, it'll be fine. Where they might be like, no, this is how it will be fine for me. And as an owner, that's the feedback you really crave, because you can't improve what you don't know. And so, that must be somewhat a refreshing cultural difference in some ways.
That's exactly right. I mean, I've loved the Australian culture of she'll be right, but she'll be right doesn't tell you a whole lot about how you're going to improve and make changes and make things better. It's kind of just a satisfaction with what is. But I think that can stagnate very quickly. And what you want to be doing is adapting and changing and moving things forward. So we've really appreciated those feedback channels. And I think we're probably perhaps more reliant on some of those community forums in the States as a result. And they've, provided really high quality feedback to our UX and design team and product teams as well.
And tell me about your role. So it's Chief Marketing Officer and Chief Customer Officer. Feels like that would own the entire customer journey. And this is the trend that we're seeing a lot more of. Can you talk about like what that actually looks like at Sendle and why you think that trend is really taking off?
Yeah, totally. So I used to be the Chief Marketing Officer. And for that role, I suppose we were very focused on top of the funnel. So really acquisition, looking at who key partners were going to be, how we ensure that from acquisition, there's a really great onboarding experience, and that leads into activation. But that's probably where it sort of ended. And I think bringing on the whole customer journey, and we actually now have what's called a customer journey optimization team, is really bringing the rest of the funnel really into focus with a particular eye on product. So what happens once you've acquired that customer and they've started sending, and then they've started sending regularly? What are the potential reasons that they might churn? Is there anything you can do about that, and at what stage you can do that? Where you bring in sort of better moments to surprise and delight your customer and to retain them, and then how you really create an evangelist out of that customer and have them, singing verses for you. So it's really been that focused on the product side of things, and then just creating a much better feedback loop with the support team who are, hearing this day in and day out, and ensuring that's injected back into the product team who are really trying to develop and delight for it. For me, it's also a little bit about, creating some fun. I think I worked at Airbnb for a while, and they built this lovely thing where you'd hear a certain chime on the app when somebody booked your property. And that sort of reinforcement of that happy sound is so lovely. So I guess we're thinking about some of the ways that we could do those sorts of things, either to thank our drivers or to be happy that, the parcel has arrived, and really just bring a little bit more joy into the product. I think it's those things that are much harder to measure, but often make the experience and the product experience that little bit more exciting.
When I chat to most chief customer officers who also are responsible for marketing, it's interesting that this role hadn't existed earlier, because it seems so obvious that actually your customer feedback, ensuring that has a good way of getting into all your marketing initiatives, is going to help you grow better as a business, because then you can really be focused on where customers are seeing value and where you need to improve. And that's going to your point, help you with acquiring more customers and making them realize value sooner. It's interesting. I think pretty much every company is going that way. And how does that look on a technology side? Like, what kind of tools help you with that? I think a lot of people listening will be running businesses, and while they understand it at a theoretical level, that having somebody responsible for the full customer experience makes sense, sometimes they're not sure how to operationalize that. Like, what does that look like? What kind of tools do you use to do it? How do they work with each other?
So I think, first of all, you need a team who's going to be dedicated to data and analytics, and you need a team who's actually going to implement it all. So it's all very well having the tools, but you need to make sure you've got folks who are almost obsessively looking at all of that data and all of the articulations of it to make sure it's actually working. But there are ways that you can test a little bit more affordably as well. You can use Optimizely, for example, and A/B test your homepage, or A/B test really important pages, just to understand what making small tweaks can actually have a huge effect. So we've been using Optimizely. We tried Amplitude and a few other A/B testing tools. Now we're having a look at Smart Look, and so we've tried a few different options, and at the moment we're quite happy with Smart Look. And then, so that's kind of on the product analytics side. We're also, really getting a little more deeply into things with Hotjar and watching how people behave on specific pages, and having kind of deeper recordings of those things and really learning from what those experiences are. And of course, you need the qualitative stuff as well. Just speaking to customers who've really thrived in your environment, and also understanding, from NPS studies where people aren't doing so well, and really kind of taking all of that down. But I think it's worth heavily investing in tracking and optimizing before you go and build something bigger. Having so much data can lead you in all sorts of directions, and I think you want to be really sure about what the insights you're taking away from those moments are before you go and build for them.
Yeah, it's interesting. I listened to a CMO who worked at multiple high growth companies, and somebody asked him, who would be your first few hires if you were doing it again? And he was saying that it would be actually operations people to help set the right foundation of technology and capturing information and interpreting information in a way that is scalable as the organization grows. And it feels like you have two different operating systems that you're trying to set the right foundation for. You have your company one that at a foundation level, you've decided we want to be a BCorp, we want to be a force for good, and we want to grow in this particular way. And then you also somewhat need to figure it out on the technology side too, where it's like, what's our foundation? How will it all work? How is this going to support us when we're 10 times the size that we are now? And both of them, if you don't do it early, you end up in a bit of a, foggy situation in the future where you're forced to make a lot of hard decisions that have a lot of probably bad business impact and cause a lot of confusion for everybody involved. So it sounds like you've avoided that trap on both fronts, which is pretty good.
Yeah, absolutely. I think investing in UX and UX research and making sure you're understanding the customer, and also that there's no complacency there, that you're always learning and always listening to them, is really key. And I think, as you said, I think really establishing your mission and your vision and your values will lead to people understanding their impact at an individual level. So things like setting what the mission is and then what those values are. We've started using our 5 H's, as we call them, which are our 5 values for not only interview practice, but also kind of like performance reviews. And in situations in which sometimes it's hard to give feedback, having something like that to guide you certainly makes things a lot easier. And having people truly understand what their impact is in terms of measures of not only revenue or growth, but what that means in terms of how many small businesses we've enabled or how many carbon offsets we've done, and therefore which projects in the Amazon or in the redwood forest we've been able to support. I think all of those things give true meaning to kind of the day-to-day. Yeah. And I think it's nice because often, somebody who the majority of their day is in a task that feels a little bit more repetitive can really understand the measure of their work through looking at those metrics. And those are things that really resonate with people. And often actually where we're attractive to new candidates more because we're a BCorp than maybe the specifics on what they're doing day to day.
Yeah, I think attractive to candidates, and also people, it probably gives them an inner resilience is too strong a word, but when you're going through a period like this year and you're probably having to deal with, as you said, nearly 3 times probably the amount of volume, when it's actually your impact on the world is more than just simply sending a parcel, I think that gives people a deeper reservoir of grit to persevere and stay with the company and make sure they're doing that to the best of their ability.
Yeah, I mean, resilience is right, and personal value is right. And I think also autonomy, right? When the vision is really clear, decision making is a whole lot easier, right? Because it means that you don't need leadership and managers meddling in some lower level decisions. Those options, and therefore the best solution is really clear when you know what the end game is.
I think that's the only way organizations can grow, is if those values are really clear to everybody in the organization. It gives them the framework to make all decisions without always having to go to their boss or their boss's boss to get approval for something. And again, back to the foundation thing, it seems that's something that you've got right at the early stages that's going to enable you a lot of growth. Is there one big metric that as an organization you're always trying to push for and that you keep in mind? A lot of companies call it a big, hairy, audacious goal, or like a North Star kind of thing that is the ultimate personification of the impact that you're trying to have.
It's interesting actually, because when we look at our longer term strategy, there's a revenue number, there's a small businesses enabled number, and then there's a carbon offsets number. And I think it's quite interesting because having all three sort of speaks to the values that might be important to each individual in the team, and tracking those has been something we're really working on. And
just back to the sense of balancing the three is probably what's making you a healthy organism.
I suppose they all underline one another and they all support one another, right? If our small businesses they'll send more parcels, and if they send more parcels, then we'll be offsetting more emissions. So they're kind of really deeply connected.
Yeah, it comes back to that point you said early, where if you're making these decisions that are better for the long term early in your journey, it actually really helps you, whether that's renewable energy or things like this. And if you are willing to incur the cost of doing that at the start, you're going to realize the benefit over your journey and actually end up in a better place. And to your point, I think all those three things reinforce the other and to make them each stronger than they would be without them. So I think it's a really interesting business that it's not surprising it's doing as well as it's doing. I saw you got a huge investment this year that's probably reflective of the financial number on those three numbers. That's going pretty well.
We've got quite a few impact investors as well, and I think seeing sort of the impact that we're making to the world in that process has been really important, really great for them as well.
Yeah. Well, I think what businesses like yours demonstrate is that I think traditionally people used to view impact investing as a nice to have and almost a cousin to being a non-profit. But I think businesses like yourself and Who Gives a Crap and a bunch of other Australian businesses are really showing that, no, you can actually have a very high profit, high growth business that is having a better impact on the world than businesses traditionally have. And like, it actually helps us grow faster than we would without, caring about these causes and having the impact on them that we are having.
Absolutely. And they align so nicely with exactly what our customers are looking for. They want to grow their small businesses, they want to learn from other small businesses, and they want to do so ethically and sustainably in the process. So being able to deliver that for them has been making us pretty proud, I will say.
I'm sure. Well, the name of the podcast is Unconventional Business. I think what we're learning as we've been going is that where businesses are thriving is they've taken what used to be considered an unconventional approach with BCorp. I think you're the first one in Australia, so by definition, it was not conventional. But as we see your success, it is actually starting to become more the convention and more how people want to interact with business. They want to make sure they're having that impact. And I think as that happens, you're probably only going to be seeing a lot more success. So I know it's been a good journey so far, but I think probably the best is yet to come.
Here's hoping. Yes, indeed. It's gonna be a fun Christmas, I tell you what.
Oh, I mean, it's an interesting year in general. I think for people in a business like yours, it's an extremely interesting year. So, yeah, best of luck for Christmas, and thanks so much for joining us on the podcast.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for tuning in to Unconventional Business by HubSpot. If you liked what you listened to, please subscribe, and I'll catch you on the next episode.